Hey everyone, welcome back to another NDBI Navigator Vodcast episode. I have a special treat for you today. We have two guest speakers who are coming to join us. We have Brooke Ingersoll, who is coming from Michigan, right next door to where I'm at here in Iowa. And then we have Ana Dvortcsak. I think I got it. Correct me
You
if I'm
did.
wrong. Anna. Yes, coming from private practice to join us. And Ana, you have to tell me where you're at because I forgot to ask. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for both coming to talk to us today.
thank you. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, which is actually where Brooke, Ingersoll, and I started our work together and Project Impact. Yeah.
Wonderful. I was just, that's one of my questions that I had for you all. Can you give us a little bit of background about what you're doing? We can start with Ana and then move it
Mhm.
down there to Brooke. Just introductions, kind of what you've been
Yeah.
doing over the past X amount of decades, being incredible professors and researchers and clinical practitioners.
Yeah. So I am in private practice and I do provide parent-mediated interventions and individual speech and language services to children with social communication challenges. And then I do a lot of training and consultation with school districts and with hospitals and private clinics to try really to develop programs and increase access to services because I think, and that's kind of how Brooke and I developed Project Impact and looking at parent-mediated interventions is how can we increase access to services so parents and families aren't waiting so long.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And if there are listeners on here who have heard me ramble on before, they know I'm a parent of an autistic child and how meaningful that is for me to support families. And also my PhD research is parent-mediated NDBI. So you ladies just tick all of the boxes with the incredible knowledge and skills that you have. And then how did you end up in Oregon?
Well, I mean, I'm from Portland, Oregon. I grew up here.
Ah,
And so I went to college and graduate school in Southern California. But then I came back in 2002, which is when Brooke also came here. And we met when we were going to develop an autism. Well, we did develop an autism program, which then turned into be Project Impact together at a nonprofit here.
love it. And Brooke, you also went to university down in Southern California,
I
correct?
did. I did. I went to graduate school at UC San Diego and moved to Portland kind of after I graduated. And Anna and I met. We were both kind of new. I mean, obviously she was originally from the area, but we were both kind of newly there and began working together and sort of hit it off right away in terms of where we saw a need. And it's been great because we've been able to be both research and program developers and collaborators, professional collaborators, but also friends for the past
Oh,
20 some
yeah.
years. Yeah, it's been a number of years now. So I think we started in 2002, 2003. So
Yeah.
kind of right when we both moved to
I
that
love
area.
it. When you're such good co-collaborators and friends that you can't even count the years
I know
anymore. It's
I
it's
been
been
know.
a number of years.
a number, yes. And then you're at Michigan State right now. And what are you working on in your lab?
Yeah, so I am in the clinical science program, and so in our lab, we are focused on research looking at the development of community viable interventions. So, I mean, Anna and I started doing this type of work before I came to MSU, more from a clinical perspective, and then when I moved into academia, I really focused on, continuing to develop things, but also thinking about kind of like the research angle and how do we evaluate, how do we understand what the specific landscape is for services, understanding strategies we can use to enhance dissemination and implementation, as well as truly understanding sort of how do our interventions work. So trying to understand like what the active ingredients are and the mechanisms of change so that we can develop as streamlined and as, I guess, usable interventions as possible. So it's been a wonderful collaboration. Anna really has that fantastic clinical experience. And so I rely on her very heavily because she's doing that on a day-to-day basis. And then I do dabble a little, I do still do some clinical work in terms of clinical supervision, but most of my time is really spent more on the research angle.
Yeah, and I know when I looked at the research, the website, which I'm going to link for everybody, the Project Impact website, and I'll link your clinical practice one I found as well. I just love the running list of research articles that are currently published. And I think when I checked last week, you have 8, 9 currently in press. Mhm. Listed. So those will be coming soon. So I get excited, like a little teaser. Like I'm always looking for things and then what's coming up on
Yeah.
Doc Next. So I will link those websites because that will be an incredible resource for the listeners to go find those articles and learn more about Project Impact. And one of the things that I just was really excited about, having lived and did my PhD in England and kind of worked through services over there, lived in Albania, provided services over there, working with Autism Speaks on some grants. It's just really interesting to me to see NDBI dissemination worldwide. And you guys have quite a few studies that I came across that were in different countries outside of the US, which is just exciting to see that reach. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about any of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the things that we've been very excited to see happen. It's interesting that in many cases, those I would say the collaborations we've had with folks have really been pretty sort of organic. I mean,
Yeah.
so we've been contacted directly by someone who's interested in translating the manual. We try to provide the support that we can.
Yep.
And I think we've seen the manual translated into at least 6 different languages, and research is being conducted internationally, usually by people that are, that have met with us and worked with us and gotten trained, but are actually independent of us, which one of the things I'm really excited about is seeing
Yes.
that research on this program being done by other people,
Yeah. Yes.
because, obviously, we're very, very close to this work.
Yeah.
So I feel much more comfortable when more people are doing work on it than just us.
Yes, I love it. And then the types of researchers that are out there doing work, and I love you guys have this mixed SLP plus BCBA kind of
Yeah.
integrated, right? Care, like we like to hang out in ESTM, kind of a whole team, kind of village to kind of raise a kid. I love that kind of mantra. Do we know, or do you guys know the types of researchers that are independent doing the work? Are they a child psychologist? I could probably read their names off the thing and find out. SLPs, developmental specialists from our international colleagues out there.
I think they're primarily psychologists and speech and
Mhm.
language pathologists.
Mhm. Love it. Yeah.
Although it's interesting in different countries, Anna and I are always learning when
Yes.
we are talking to our collaborators internationally, because systems are just very different. And so, for example, in China, I know there was a paper that came out of there, and I think that was by basically a pediatrician or a physician. So in China, what we've learned from some of our more recent conversations is that oftentimes the hospitals are the
Mhm.
kind of the primary place where a lot of this work is done, and they're sort of overseen by physicians, which is not typically in the United States where most of this type of work is done. So that's been interesting as well.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Yes, I'm trying to think Albania Autism Center, but definitely NIH kind of in England, universities, health
Yep.
system,
Yeah.
very different approach to research. Well, how did you guys get into NDBIs?
Yeah.
Thinking back X amount of years ago, like I just
So
stumble into it, had an amazing mentor. I was very much old school, traditional ABA. So I had a real long journey to get here, and I'm very happy to be here now.
So for me, I'm a speech and language pathologist. So I was in graduate school in the 90s, and there's a strong emphasis on developmental models, like the zone of proximal development. You're only going to teach those skills that are slightly more complex, as well as like Bloom and Leahy's content, form, and use. So use being the pragmatic. So you're never going to teach language outside of functionality. So I think those are more in line with some of the developmental models. And in my program, they were talking about incidental teaching and milieu teaching. So it was much more naturalistic. Ironically, I did happen to have a job. This was before BCBAs, but I was trained by graduate psychologists at UCLA in Lovaas discrete trial. And so I did some of that, and I think you take what you know from, stimulus response reinforcement, which I think is very much how we often are learning things,
Yep.
but then having that natural context felt much more comfortable to me always. And so that's where I've been aligned. And I think, like I said, being a speech pathologist, always having that functionality. So you would never
Yes.
teach just a content of a word without thinking about how are we going to use it or what's the function.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I kind of came. Yeah.
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 And then my background, my very first job or professional endeavor was working in a in-home behavioral program that used discrete child training. But then kind of right after college, I did that in college, sort of right when we started to see ABA being used in community settings. But I mean, it was the family had to hire an expert from outside and hire their own staff and train. So, they didn't have agencies that were delivering programs. Um,
Then.
but then after college, I started working at the Walden program in Emory, which used an incidental teaching model. It's an inclusive classroom program. And then when I went to graduate school, we really focused on pivotal response training, which is another now NDBI. But what was interesting is I feel like incidental teaching and PRT were both what we would have called at the time naturalistic behavioral approaches.
Mm.
So we were seeing these as they were still being sort of viewed through a purely behavioral lens, but they were always following the child's lead, teaching in natural environments, using natural reinforcement. And then I feel like when Anna and I started working together, she definitely was bringing some of this additional developmental component. And so I feel like it was really kind of a very natural merging of bringing in those sort of naturalistic behavioral strategies and then augmenting them with some of these more developmental strategies. And so Project Impact really kind of from the get-go was really informed by these two different perspectives.
Winner,
Yeah.
winner. Yes, absolutely. And I think that is so important to talk about that developmental aspect that comes in and then that focus on everything. Because I know in my grad school programming, I had, my undergrad was psychology. I had a course on human development, right? But in my master's program in ABA, nothing about child development, autism. In my PhD program, nothing about that as well. So I really had to kind of go research it myself, learn from amazing SLPs that I get to work with. And then when I had Liam, I just dug deep into some child development courses online for free, just to kind of think about what am I supposed to do with this 2-month-old little chicken nugget sized baby? Like, how am I supposed to engage this child? Give me a 12, 14-month, I'm on it. But anything younger
Yeah.
than that, he's our first and only, don't have nieces and nephews around. So it was really interesting to think about Vygotsky and all this amazing
Yes.
stuff coming out here about what we can do in play schemas and like early social communication and all of this incredible stuff that is happening pre vocalizations, if you will, and really kind of made me rethink some of the programs that I had developed over the years without having an interdisciplinary approach and kind of trying to muddle my way through vocalization programs, egoic programs, and kind of thinking about, okay, manding and protesting, right? Those kind of pragmatic functions, super strong. But all of the other incredible social pragmatic functions that are out there, that was completely new to me that I had no knowledge of. And I think now, Anna, back to your context, your comment about the context or the functionality, why would you teach it any other way? Like I feel like when your eyes are opened and you see it through that lens, it's really hard to go back and teach it in a discrete, isolated manner that doesn't seem to be as effective or efficient, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
feel it the same way.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's what we were trying to put together when we developed Project Impact. It was really fun because we looked at the continuum of all of the interventions
Yeah.
from, very developmental, like floor time to more discrete trial and the strategies that were used and some of the overlapping, characteristics and what, as Brooke said, did we see were the key elements that we should pull out to intertwine. And I definitely think and I think from the beginning, even with Lovas's research, he said children can learn, but they're not maintaining or generalizing the skills. And that's where pivotal response training was like, let's use their interests. So I think in research, it was definitely coming along before I came along, but I think it was getting it into clinical practice. And how do we do that in a way, which I think, as you spoke to, we're still working on,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I still think like I remember having a very like what I thought at least for us was a very pivotal moment because I think one of the challenges with some of the dissemination piece is the language that we use as professionals in the
Yeah.
theory that guides our work because so I was trained in a more behavioral model and
Mhm.
behavior has very specific lingo. It was developed that way on purpose. The lingo was developed specifically to make sure that they were not to be confused with kind of the way people use terms in general.
Yep.
But there's a very specific theory and language that's used, and development has its own theory and language. And so oftentimes I feel like professionals who are often doing a lot of the same things are talking past each other.
Yeah.
So I still remember Anna and I would have these great philosophical conversations. And then I was like, why don't I just come see a session? And I walked and I watched her do a session. And then she's like, why don't I watch you do a session just doing PRT? And
Hmm.
she watched me do a session. And like I would say like 90 to 95% of what we were doing, even though she was doing a purely developmental approach, I was doing like a purely naturalistic behavioral approach. About 90% of them, 95 was the same thing, but she used different terms
Yep.
for what I was doing and I used different terms. And that's when we really started to say, like, we've got to stop thinking about theory for a moment and
Yeah.
really look at what are we actually doing and what is the reaction of the child.
Right.
I think that really helped us sort of step back and really think about how do we really integrate this in a
Yeah.
way that is like meaningful and that we can communicate to professionals who come from different theoretical models. And so we spent a lot of time really thinking about the language choices we made to describe techniques to make sure that they were understandable to families and that they weren't falling too much in one camp or another, such that we would be alienating professionals that came from one
Yeah.
theoretical background or another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was interesting because in Portland at that time, you had two camps, and one group of parents was like strongly aligned with floor time, and the other group was strongly aligned with discrete trial training and professionals. So we were like, how do we, and that's where we came up with our talk and then the book chapter that I wrote, like, how do we come up with that? These are actually the same skills, behavior, strategies that people are using, but we're using different terms for them so that people could see how it overlapped with either one of the interventions for which they were using.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that for families trying to find something that's comfortable for them and going online, getting that diagnosis, and then going online and searching for something and perhaps coming across a great ABA program, like a more traditional type one, but not understanding the lingo or not understanding kind of the conceptually systematic kind of approach that we have within that, or not feeling comfortable with it and kind of sidestepping away. And it sounds like you guys have really brought the best of both worlds together, which is what we want, this multi kind of integrated kind of approach to help support that child, because you can only be an expert in so much, right? So you guys have this great approach to kind of influence Project Impact to have all of that goodness coming in to help parents feel more comfortable about it, or maybe perhaps a wonderful bridge for providers who might come from a behavior analytic background, who might think, kind of based on the articles that they read, that's not scientific, that's not ABA influent. It is, right? You're bringing like you said, the best of everything and kind of bringing it together, and it's still backed by science. You just might call it something different. So don't be scared to go look into it and to really think about that behavioral component that is strong. I always feel like I talk a lot to behavior analysts. I have to really sell this NDBI stuff to them. And I don't know if you guys encounter that. I feel like it's a myth and misconception. You just don't understand what it is. And it's, do you guys see that as well in practice or research?
I did in practice here when I was working with some BCBAs and going through, it's the same stimulus response reinforcement. It's just that you're using a strategy to set up the child initiating the teaching episode.
Yeah.
Then you help them with the skill, and then the reinforcement is what the child wants. And so I think when you go through, and that's where it does help to, use terms that whoever you're working with is familiar with to overlay how you're using the strategies. But I think some people, and Brooke could maybe speak to this, have difficulty. They're like, but how am I going to collect all my data? Like if I'm responsive to the child, you don't have a cookie cutter approach because your prompts or strategies need to be based on the child's response and initiation. And so I think that's some areas that we work on, like, well, this is how you can still collect your data at this time, when you're going back and forth in a natural paradigm.
And it's so meaningful and still effective, and you would still analyze that and make a decision based on that. It's just maybe perhaps a different way of collecting data, right? but
Yeah.
you're still getting your data in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
it's interesting. I mean, I feel like in with all the different families and providers we've worked with over the years, I have rarely ever seen a family concerned with how these strategies are used or the language that we're using or the implementation. But it is more providers. I think sometimes there can be some barriers based on sort of their training background in terms of, what counts as therapy, and is this something that's in my purview? Like, is this something that that I can practice?
Oh,
Is it still consistent with my theoretical model? So, it's one of those things where families don't care.
yeah.
They want strategies that are helpful for making their interactions with their child, more positive and more successful. Where I think we sometimes get a little bit of challenges is more, the professionals who've tied themselves very strongly to one particular theoretical approach or not.
Yes, absolutely. And thinking about that tying of that, where's that? So loosen the strings up, just kind of step over here and kind of look at it, investigate it, learn
Yep.
about it, and go back to your safe spot if it's not for you. But
Yep.
really kind of getting people to understand it. And there was something online that I had seen a while ago, and it was like a bottle.
Mhm.
And it was a marble, and that marble represented the 30 minutes that a child received from a speech therapy session once a week. And if that's all that that family did, that's all that child would get. But if we think about parent mediated and supporting parents and kind of applied activities and integrating things within daily routines, right? Embedding those naturalistic opportunities, then this bottle is full of all of these marbles, and the whole child's waking hours from the time they open their eyes to the time they go to bed are full of learning and context and routines, and what a difference that will make for that child. So again, just loving Project Impact for how much it empowers parents to not just get the education and the skills, but also to feel comfortable or confident that they are their child's best teacher and that they can make a difference and it is meaningful. And I really feel like that's something Project Impact does very well from the families that I have seen that use it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And parents know their children best. I'm thinking of a child that I work with. Sometimes, I mean, we want to help the child communicate so they can have autonomy over self. And the
Yeah.
parent will be like, oh, he's, wanting this, but I wouldn't know that because I don't know the child as well. And so that's where, too, I think with the collaboration, you can truly be helping the child communicate what they're trying to do because the parent knows that better. And then you can have some strategies to help. And to
Yeah.
that end, I should say Project Impact would not be what it is without all of the parents who
Mhm.
worked with us and read over the strategies and said, no, that's not something that we're going to understand. You need to use this vocabulary or
Yeah.
this or that. So parents had a huge influence on making it parent friendly because I was not a parent at that time.
Yeah.
And once I became a parent, then I knew a little bit more about that. Yeah.
And I love that as a parent myself, thinking about parents I've coached. Sometimes I'm like, I would not do that as a parent. So I think about the things I'm like, yeah, just do this, right? And now I think, oh yeah, I get these competing contingencies. I gotta cook dinner. I need to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah,
One child,
exactly.
one in the house.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I feel it now. I'm very humbled by those lessons that I had and thinking about. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's just so much going on and being able to layer in this intervention in a way that really supports parents to kind of lean into the routines as opposed to carving out extra time that they
Right.
don't
Yeah.
have in their already busy, hectic schedules and lives. Just makes it something that I think parents can come into those contingencies of reinforcement, right? And they're getting reinforced, they're making a difference, but they're doing it in a way that just supports everyday life.
Yes.
So they're more likely to keep doing it as opposed to I got no more time on my calendar to carve out even 20 minutes can be overwhelming for some families. And you guys have done such a great way of really showing families how to just kind of lean into life, and embed the learning there, generalization, right? Retention, maximize learning. You're getting all of that because you're hanging out in an area that we all do, life.
Yeah.
That's another thing that is so strong with Project Impact as opposed to different types of programs.
And I think some of that is because I think what I've seen in a lot of interventions is, they're developed to be clinical or clinician delivered interventions, and then we find a good effective intervention, then we say, okay, now we're going to teach it to parents, rather than thinking through developing it from the perspective of what do families need to feel supported, and developing the program around that. And I think that's one of the things that was unique about Project Impact, rather than starting with an evidence-based intervention that was for therapists and then just putting it in a teaching model. We developed it within the context of a coaching model from the very beginning. And for that reason, we got all sorts of feedback from parents saying, like, this is just not going to work for me, or the way you taught me this before that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so it really helped us sequence the curriculum and develop supports that were really, really going to make parents feel like this is something that's absolutely achievable and easy to integrate, as opposed to, coming at it from the way we might teach a clinician.
No, I love that. I did not know that. That's incredible. I love that kind of, really, instead of taking that circle peg and putting it in the square hole and trying to kind of shave some edges off to make it fit, you really have looked at it from the perspective of coaching and supporting parents to really make it as meaningful as possible. And I love that now it's almost like a lot of clinicians are using it. So it's kind of, you backed into that almost to get there, which is great. Can you talk a little bit about Project Impact, if there are people that are listening who might not be familiar with the book, which is in its second edition, correct? And I think you mentioned 6 languages possibly that it's been translated into. Just kind of an overview of it.
Sure. Like which one? Okay. So, so Project Impact is, as you said, a parent-mediated intervention. So we go through a number of strategies to help parents improve their child's social engagement, so that back and forth reciprocity, initiation, the child's communication skills, imitation skills, both for the social function and then also as a way of, learning, so they know how in their environment. It's something strong that we use to learn how to interact, and then play skills for the development of that as we're going through. And it really starts out by, we're emphasizing on what goals the parents have for their child. So what's going to have the greatest impact for the child and the family within their context.
Yeah.
And I always say, I'm not in your family, so I don't know what's going to be important. And once you design the goals, then we'll come up with strategies that we systematically go through to teach them one, at a time, so that they can use them within their ongoing routines and daily lives, which I think is important because there's so many different, family frameworks or family systems. And so that allows the families to teach within their context of their life.
Yes. And you guys have, it's usually within arm's reach. I see it right back there. The clinician or the trainer kind of a module, which manual, which is a bit bigger. And then there's a parent, I'm going to call it homework application or a parent workbook.
Yeah.
Yes, grab it. I know you got it. You got it within reach.
Right. Yeah, okay, yeah. So we have the coach manual, which is quite big. But this actually, like, it spells out each session, both for an individual program where the coach works individually with a parent and child, as well as a group-based program, so that the a provider can teach multiple parents the strategies in a more of a didactic group format, and then have opportunities to do individual coaching with each family. So we really developed 2 different ways of teaching the same information, because again, this was, developing things in the community. We started doing it as an individual coaching model because we worked together in a speech clinic.
Yep.
But then when we started working with some collaborators in preschool environments, they were like, well, we don't see families one-on-one, so we can't use your model. So we developed a group model that was still allowed for individual coaching,
Okay.
but did it in a way that you could serve more families, and that the didactic piece could be done in a group learning approach.
Yep.
So the manual for the coaches spells out, like, how do you do every session? And now we thought that was really important because when we started, and I would say probably even still, most of the clinicians we were working with had been trained very well to work with kids, but they had not been really trained well on how to do parent coaching. And so providers were saying, I don't know how to run a session. Like, I think parents should learn. I'd love to have them involved, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So we developed a very step-by-step guide to support providers who really don't have a lot of that background in effective parent coaching strategies. And then we have the parent coaching manual that, again, goes along with it. Everything is written in very simple language, so that the parents can have that support as they're learning.
And I love the pictures in it and the spot where they could write in there just to
Mhm.
really get that engagement from parents to when we come see you again, reflection, discussion, just pinpointing some of the struggles, kind of like supporting the struggles and stretching the strengths is how I like to think about it as you can kind of reinforce the things that are going well that parents feel confident in, but we can also kind of revisit some
Mhm.
things they might have jotted down that they want a little bit more support in on a strategy and that the strategies kind of build on one another. And I love that it's done in such a way where it's not everything at once to overwhelm an already overwhelmed parent. It's done in a way we always want to meet the child where they are, but we also need to meet the parents where they are. And I think Project Impact does that as well with all of the supports that you guys have in place with the little visuals, the language that you use, the catchy little phrases to really kind of keep it sticky, right? So it
Yeah.
stays in the parents' minds that they can keep reflecting on that and keep trying to apply it and put it into practice, which for them is life and everyday routines to have it there. And then you guys also have, if you can talk about this for people who might not be familiar, there is a certification program for Project Impact. If people want to learn more and say, oh my God, this is incredible, gonna buy the books, I'm gonna read it. And then if they want to get additional training, that would be my thought, the next step. They can do that because you offer an intro, advanced, and I believe a certification program. Would you mind talking about that if they wanted to learn more?
Go
Sure.
ahead,
I
Anna.
love
You're
it.
just, I know, we're like, who's going to talk? So we do have a beginner online e-course, which is available through our website. And that really goes over the key elements of each of the intervention strategies. So as with parent, we want to make the strategies functional too. So our emphasis is always on like, why would the parent be doing this? You know, what are they looking for with their child? So, oh, you're going to be following your child's lead and imitating them to see if they stay with you longer, to see if you're building more of the back and forth. So the beginner course really builds on the key elements of the intervention strategies and what skills they address. Um, and then the advanced course is a little bit more on how to. So we get into how do you develop goals collaboratively? How do you coach parents effectively? And as you highlighted, in a systematic way. So we're teaching only one skill at a time because that really facilitates learning. If you're trying to learn everything all at once, it's too hard and you would be coaching on too many things. So sort of the coaching sessions and the collaborative goal setting. So the advanced course is more to like how to coach.
Yeah.
Um, and then the certification process, you work with a trainer and we have a list, and that's where you get fidelity checks of the key elements of Project Impact. So the intervention fidelity, collaborative goal setting fidelity, and coaching fidelity to make sure you're hitting those
I love
areas for those
that.
that want more training.
And I love when you talked about systematically introducing the strategies. So it's not overwhelming, but also from a kind of for me, from like a research practice mindset of knowing if something is a bit off, which one is off, and
Exactly.
how do
Yeah.
we redirect, co-correct, right, kind of bring it back and adjust it before we layer in another variable or layer in another strategy
Yeah.
that then, right, we're putting it together now. Everything looking okay.
Right.
Now we're going to add in the next one. And they all kind of build, or for me, like in the ESDM, they're all integrated. They all really are influencing one another, which for ESDM Philly, which is more important than others. I can tell you my top three that I think if we don't have is going to definitely impact your overall fidelity. And I'm always curious to know, like, are there certain ones within Project Impact that when you talk about the characteristics or the variables that really stand out? So like for me in ESTM, management of child attention and motivation, those are critical for me. If those two particular fidelity items are off, I see it impact every other fidelity item. It kind of trickles down. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys notice that in Project Impact, certain things seem to, if this is really strong, it really bodes well, or, oh, they're all just
Yeah.
cool.
Well,
Do you?
I mean, there are a few things. I mean, definitely as an NDBI, I think the ability to sort of follow into the child's lead and attention If a parent is having difficulty doing that, it makes it more challenging to layer on all the other strategies.
Yeah.
And so for that, I mean, for that aspect, that's one of those things, and that's why we teach it first. And we consider that sort of the base of the pyramid, which is you really need to be able to focus on your child.
Yep.
And that involves following their lead or imitating them in two different ways you can focus on the child, so that parents really are able to do that, following into their child's attentional lead, which
Yep.
sounds quite similar to what you're talking about with the
I like.
SDM. And
Yep.
then they can start layering strategies on top of that. So I would say that's a really key piece. And I think another key piece is really helping the child initiate. And we think of that as sort of the middle of the pyramid. So like once once you're following into their attention, how do you get them to direct their attention to you? How do we get them to initiate with us? And again, I think those techniques, which the child may need different, we have a couple different techniques at that level, and the child may respond better to one or another, but really helping the child initiate before we start teaching new skills, I think, is another really important aspect.
Absolutely.
And I will say one of the things that we've seen in our research is that um, parents' use of the project impact strategies or parent fidelity, when it impacts the child's intentional communication, and that includes spontaneous use of verbal or nonverbal means to communicate, that actually is kind of this key mechanism of change that leads to long-term expressive language development. So we think those strategies that really help the parent facilitate that initiation is really going to have that long-term impact on their expressive communication.
Yeah, that would be incredible if you have some articles or anything to
Yeah,
link.
we have a one that came out this year that I can send to you that we can share
My
about that.
own for my own self, but also
Yeah,
for others. And
yeah.
really looking at when I kind of come into environments, clinical consulting, and we have just speaking exactly to what you're talking about, kiddos who are not initiating. For me, I'm not looking at the kiddo, I'm looking at the environment. And most often, there is no opportunity for the child to initiate. It's all adult directed. So is it that they can't do it or that there's no opportunity for them to do it? So having this intentional communication, like you shared, or really looking at initiation to think about this back and forth dyadic kind of social reciprocity is so important. And I don't see that focus in a lot of traditional ABA type programs other than like a manding requesting. For me,
Yeah.
that's very different than all of the other social pragmatic ways that we could be communicating back and forth socially with one another, other than just getting your needs met by requesting. So I love that that is such a big focus. And I agree. I think all of that with gestures and imitation is such a really important predictor for language. Language is social. And if you don't have that foundation, what are you building on, right? You might get language, but is it used in a functional, pragmatic, contextual way, right? We're looking for that generalized, maximized, efficient learning in the ESTM, same kind of concept of kind of layering it out there. We have to have something to build on those strategies, the attention, the motivation, and kind of bringing it all together. So I love to hear that you guys have that focus of that and that it's really on people's radars. Are you even programming for this? Are you providing opportunities? And in my little clinic in Vegas, we used to have visuals everywhere. Stop so they can initiate. Every room had that visual. Are you actively giving them a chance to be the speaker, not the listener? And it was a big shift for a lot of providers to get into that mindset, and so meaningful and so impactful. It's not from your research. I love it. How do you guys stay up to date on NDBI research, other things that are going on in the community that's growing, hopefully more and more as we do kind of keep disseminating things like this? Any advice to practitioners that are listening who want to make the shift or pivot over to NDBIs, where you guys get information, journal alerts, or how do you guys stay updated with everything?
Well, I mean, I would say for myself, a big portion of my job as a researcher involves staying really up to date on the research literature and being affiliated with the university. I, of course, have
Ah,
free access to all of those articles. So I am very
lucky.
frequently accessing the literature itself.
Mhm.
But I think beyond that, there's just a lot going on through professional organizations. So for those individuals who maybe are not their 90% of their job doesn't involve reading the peer review literature. I think there are a couple sort of special interest groups. So there's the NDBI SIG that's affiliated with ABAI.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful. They do some really amazing work. They've put out a couple articles trying to bring that to public awareness.
Yeah.
Probably, Anna, as a speech pathologist, where are you seeing
I mean, will
professionals?
you give me all,
Yeah,
you keep me
yeah,
up to speed, but not everybody has a Brooke who's doing the research. So
Everybody needs a book.
but everybody needs a Brooke. So that's where I get all of my updates. But I mean, Asha will send out different information as well. I mean, it's been interesting to me, and I mean, I guess I would encourage people if they hear a little tidbit on social media to somehow go research it. And so I think that that's a way some people are getting more information, though I'm not sure how much, in looking at the research. And somebody presented on that at the last NDBI conference that
Yeah.
you had, that like a lot of it may not be as accurate. So how can we start to get more information that is accurate and research based out there? I think would be an important question. And until then, I think some of the organizations, that Brooke mentioned are going through,
Yeah.
to access them.
Anna and I have, I feel like we're kind of like the wrong age to
Yes.
be thinking about how to best disseminate this to the young professionals, where many young professionals and families as well are getting information from social media. And so we're really trying. It's so funny because, we're trying to put together these like little snippets, and every one of them, it's like, this is too long. I'm like, I can't
Yes.
such small snippets.
Yeah.
But I do actually think that that is something that is somewhat incumbent on us as a broader field of
Yes.
NDBI practitioners and researchers, that I really think we need to do a better job of getting information to people in the format in which they are, most likely accessing it. So I think that's something that we as a field more broadly might really want to think about. How do we do this in a meaningful way so that we can kind of leverage each other's strengths? And because so many of these NDBIs share a lot of components, and there's different ones that are better suited for certain families or providers or contexts. But ultimately, I think what we really want to see is we want to see these NDBIs getting out there so that, we can see, gains for families and kids. So I think that is something that, I know we have struggled with. Again, I don't know how many practitioners are sitting down and reading peer review articles. How much time do they
I
have
know.
to caseload? So we need to think a little bit better about how do we get that info out.
Yeah.
I love that. One of the things we've talked about for the SIG, for the NDBI SIG, is we've pulled in some young blood, some youth.
Yeah.
The
We
people
need
that
the
are
youth
on
for this.
Instagram and the people that are on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's beyond, I'm sorry, that will never happen for me, but I'm all about working with the young generation of,
Yeah.
when I started out, these people weren't even born yet. And I'm like, oh Lord, you guys are young. But that's what they're interested in. So we've talked about how do we take some of these incredible peer-reviewed articles and use visuals and make little visual infographics to kind of catch their attention of the highlights, because they're probably not going to have access or have time, or maybe have the desire to sit down and read the whole thing, which I would love to get my hands on. But that might spark their interest and get them to start kind of then seeking out, the manual, something else. So that dissemination effort, like you're talking about, how do we reach the younger generation? Somebody's got to be out there making short TikToks. Somebody needs to be putting reels on Instagram. I hope I said that right. Reels and carousels on Instagram, and utilizing students who might be in a lab who have the knowledge. We give them the content and they repurpose it and put it out there in a way to attract more professionals. That's something I know we've been talking about doing, and trying to do that in a systematic manner so we can track social media, track what's getting opened, what's getting researched and looked at, to keep making more. Apparently, these are the influencers. There's a whole profession of influencer. I don't know much about that other than that they exist, and I feel like we need some influencers in our field to really help get some traction for some of the amazing things that you guys are all doing.
And it's funny because on the one hand, I'm very hesitant a little bit, and partly it's just my age, but hesitant about social media as a primary way people get information, because we do know that a lot of that information isn't good quality. But at the same time, some of the nice things I think are it's one of the first times you can really see what an intervention looks like. I mean, so many interventions have been done kind of behind the clinic door.
Yeah.
Um, and so I can just imagine as a parent who's, told I need to go get therapy and you get this list of providers and you hear these terms, but what does that actually look like? And you can't really tell until you've gotten into it.
Yep.
And I think that one of the powerful aspects of social media is to be allow people just to see brief little clips. Be like,
Yeah.
oh, I do that with my kid, or that looks fun, or I feel like I could do this. This isn't scary. This isn't overwhelming. And so I do see ways in which it really democratizes a lot of things.
Mhm.
Um, so that a family doesn't have to kind of go in blind. They know what they're looking for. They know what they want to ask for. So trying to figure out how to do that with my limited skill set,
I know.
I think is going to be the next thing. And how do we make sure that the stuff that's out there is actually like accurate?
Yeah.
And I love that, kind of jumping on real quick for that, thinking about parents going in blind, parents who are jumping from therapy to therapy. And sometimes I think families get a bad rap, like, oh, you're just not happy. No, I think they just know in their minds what they want to help support their child. And they're on a wait list, they're desperate, they'll just jump in and they get in there. Oh, this is not what I envisioned
Yeah.
for my
Right.
child. Right. So giving
Yep.
that information about this is what a project impact session should look like, right?
Yeah.
Then they have the opportunity to make an informed choice, but they
Yep.
can't make an informed choice if they don't have the information. And reading a manual or reading a study is very different than seeing that tidbit
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
video. Oh, that's fun. I want my
Yep.
child to have a childhood. I want him
Yep.
or her to have fun while they are learning in a meaningful, functional,
Yeah.
textual way. And I think that's a great um, tidbit of advice to think about. How do we share that with families or other practitioners to
Yep.
help better inform
Hmm.
families? I love that.
Yeah. I
Going off
think
on a
that's what
tangent in my
some
head.
Mhm.
Sorry.
practitioners have been telling us is they're like, we look at a short reel, like 30 seconds, and then if we're interested, we start to seek it out. But I think a lot of professionals who are doing so many clinical hours of billable work or don't have the time for research or development, or parents who are busy, that's how they can get a quick look at something and then seek out further information, hopefully. So, yeah.
Yes. And I think you guys on your website, correct me if I'm not wrong, there are little videos,
Yeah.
short
Yep.
little
Mhm.
videos. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overview of some. Okay. So
Yep.
Mhm.
I'll try to link that for everyone to go look. And there, I think I've seen something on YouTube.
Yep.
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 Is it thinking of the same
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. So we've really tried to make we've tried to do that. Again, we are not social media experts, but we've tried to make some visuals just to really help people see so that they go in knowing what they're likely to get.
Yeah.
Yes. And the parents are talking about their
Yep.
experience, which is incredible.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I will make that also on a link. And yes, I would love to see the study about the intentional communication initiators, a
Yeah.
big personal interest of mine, but also thinking about really kind of getting that information in a way into the hands of I'm thinking about the SIG. How do we take
Yep.
that study? How do
Yep.
we make it into an infographic to get back to the authors? Does that track? Like we didn't lose anything
Yep.
meaningful. We
I
kept
love that.
highlights
Mhm.
Love
and
that
then
idea.
we have our young blood put it out there, and we do that in a systematic way where we're posting at the right time and the right format to get that out there, but that we're not losing, nothing gets lost in translation, right? That it is accurate information. I think it could be a wonderful collaboration to take advantage the people that we have that are willing to do that, but we would need to give them the content accurately, and then they put it out there. So
Love that idea.
Love that idea.
we'll
Yeah.
circle back to that one. It has been incredible to have both of you ladies on here talking about Project Impact and sharing your story and your journey. It's always wonderful to kind of hear these amazing professionals that are on here, where they came from, how they started, how they got into NDBIs. So from myself and everyone who's listening, thank you so much for your time and sharing your journey with us.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you so
you
much
for
for having
having
us.
us.
Thank you.